perfect. I am looking at our textbook. And in our book, there's a lot of stuff that's kind of bouncing around here at the beginning. I apologize for that. Sometimes as teachers wish that we had time to just, you know, like reinvent the book, but we don't. But this is in our lesson 4. At the very top of lesson 4 in the overview document, this is the overview that tells us what our reading assignment is for the week and all this great stuff. I added this little screen print of the table of contents from our textbook. And in chapter 3, there's these 2 sections that talk about iteration, which is looping, and decision making, which are if statements, that we are going to skip for now. We're going to come back to those in a week or 2, but right now we're not working with those constructs yet. And then in chapter 4, the understanding arrays and understanding C# nullable types is the same way. Let's skip those for now. We're going to come back to them later. What we're going to focus on in chapter 4 right now are methods and parameters, which the rest of that stuff is. So that's in our overview document. If you're ever looking at the book and you're thinking, boy, this just isn't really making a lot of sense to me. Whenever I was in college and I was taking programming classes, there were some chapters that I had to read multiple times. It was not just a matter of reading through the material and practicing the program instructions that were given. Sometimes I had to go back and reread it again. And then sometimes I found that even though I understood the concept and I could maybe write the program, I still had to go back and read it again to actually get the terminology down and in my mind and connect those 2 pieces, the hands-on part to the kind of terminology and all of that kind of stuff part. So there can be a lot to it. It's a lot different than taking a class, say, I don't want to pick on any certain classes, but I know when I was in school, I took American history probably in 2nd grade, 3rd grade, 4th grade, 5th grade, 7th grade, 9th grade, 11th grade. I had it several times in college. So every time I had American history, I was just building on knowledge that I already had. How many times did I have computer programming in school? Me, myself, none, right? Not until I got to college. Yeah, don't even talk about when it was invented. But, but I did have it in college, and it was all new. And every time I read any material, it was new. And I had to sometimes read it multiple times. So have you guys watched on Discord? Have you looked at any of the other channels? Sometimes I'm just a stalker watching some of the channels. And one channel, one station that is interesting to me is the game programming one, because I have a game programming class. And we could share that station, but we don't too much. But Dr. Ford has had the people in that class doing some tutorials. And I can tell that because of the comments that they've made in the class. And what's super funny to me is, out of this class, there are probably every other person says, I was having a really hard time with the tutorials. I couldn't get anything to work. And then I read the instructions, and it just all went really well and really smoothly. And it's so funny how many people said that. It was really being awful until I read the instructions. And then once I read the instructions, I knew what to do. Well, that's the way it is when you're programming. Sometimes you can't just try it to see how it works out. Sometimes you can, but you have to be really careful doing that, because sometimes you can get invalid ideas, or you can think that something works a certain way and that's not really how it works. That's just how it appeared in your testing. So we always have to be doing the reading and stuff that goes along with it so that we know for sure we're getting a good understanding. So we left off last time at that previous page where there was the big table with all the different data types. And we were talking about how C# is strongly typed. It really likes to know the type of data that it's working with so that it can work with things quickly and get stuff done. So I'd like to go just a little bit further in that. And I know that some of you are working on it on your own, and that's great. Let's just get as much exposure to it as we possibly can. I'm right here on page 69, and I want to open a new project, create a new project to try these additional variable declarations. So I'm going to open Visual Studio. And I'm going to choose File, New, Project. And again, however you want to create your project is fine, but I'm going to create a console app using the .NET framework. Now my location where my project is going to be saved, it has retained it from earlier today, but this morning when I logged on, it wasn't in the right place. So I did have to browse to go find my OneDrive folder. And I'm not exactly sure why mine is not retaining that value. I hope yours is, keeping your folder the way you want it. All right, so I want to create a new project, and I'm going to name it Chapter 3 New Variables 102. And you'll see why we're naming it New Variables here in a minute. And last time when we created a couple of projects, we saw that if we updated our using statements and we put in a using static, we could get away from typing that console keyword every time we use a console command. We also saw that if we did 2 slashes, that would give us a comment in our code. So if we do 2 slashes at the beginning of a line, we have a comment line. If we do 2 slashes further on, it's just the rest of the line is a comment. And we saw if we did a slash asterisk, we could start a block comment and the asterisk slash would end it. Well, there's actually a third type of comment in C#, and it's kind of handy. It's an XML comment, and I'm going to press enter up here at my namespace. And then I'm going to type 3 slashes, 3 forward slashes. And if you type those, you should see it on you. And what's going on here is it gives you a begin tag and an end tag for you to type in summary information about this program. And then these XML tags will be assembled and shown to people that use your code. So it's a double comment. It works good for our code, and it's something that is documentation for our program. So for this one, I'm just going to say explore, yes.
Is there a reason why the summary tags look like HTML?
Because they're XML, so they're extended markup language, and that way we can actually use them for things. So it'll pick that out. But that's why you're on top of it. So we want to explore other variable declarations. Yeah, that's why we get all used to that HTML and XML, and you can see it in other places. So we saw last time, just barely, that we could declare a variable by specifying the data type and then the variable name or identifier. I'm going to go into my main and type some code. So make sure that you're within the opening and closing curly brackets of your main. And I want to do a write line. In this write line statement, I'm going to output a heading that's going to say data declarations. And that's all I want to do there. Now I want a couple of comments. And for our first comment, we're going to say that our local variables are declared as so. Data type, var name, semicolon. So this is just to remind us that when we're declaring a variable, we use the type of data that this is going to hold, and then the name of the variable. And that's all we need to declare a variable. So I could declare an integer named myInt like that. Now at this point, when I declare that myInt, memory is going to be allocated for that integer, and there's nothing actually in it, right? It's not been initialized. Let's declare a string. Here's a string called myString. Again, we're just going to declare that string. Now, if we want to add some data to our string, we could. Let's go ahead and use a write line statement first. Now, a couple things about our program so far. It doesn't really output anything. Right now, if we ran it, we would just be checking to make sure that we didn't have any sort of syntax error. What are these green squigglies? What are those saying if you mouse over them?
They're not being used.
Not being used. So they're not an error. It's not any sort of warning or error condition. It's just like informational to let us know this might be an unnecessary variable because we're not using it anywhere in our code. Now, I'm going to go ahead and give our myString variable a value. So let's set it equal to, this is my character data. So here we've declared our string variable on one line of code, and then we've given it a value on the next line of code. We could have done that all in one line if we wanted to. That would have been fine to string myString equals. Now our string here that we've assigned to our myString variable is all within double quotes. And anytime we have an equal sign like that, it's an assignment statement. Right, we're assigning a value to that variable. Let's try and run it, make sure we don't have any errors. I'm going to press Control F5 just to make sure it runs. The only thing we should see as output is our message data declarations. And then that's it. So everybody's working okay? No errors so far? We want to get rid of those before they cause us trouble. Now, let's declare a few other things. After our myString, I'm going to go declare 3 bools on a single line. So I'm going to declare some Boolean variables. And this is just an example to show you that we can declare multiple variables on one line of code. I'm going to make Boolean B1 equal to true, B2 equal to false, and B3 equal to B1. And all that should be fine. So I could do that with integer data or anything if I wanted to. One more. All of our data types inherit from the C# system object. So our Boolean object is no different. Let's use system.boolean data type to declare a bool. So this is exactly the same. I can get it up there. Using system.boolean is exactly the same as using bool. This is just a system object name.
Does it have any, what is the difference? Can you do anything different That's it.
Not really.
So there's no reason not to just use bool.
Right. Some people like to be really specific about the definition of things and exactly where objects come from. So some people like to code that way where they identify every single item in their code, you know, all the way to the top level of where it comes from. Totally not necessary. They should be about the same. There is maybe a little bit of a difference, and we'll look at it in just a second. Now I want to do a write line to output all of this data that we've been working on. So we've got all of these wonderful variables. Let's output your data, and then we're going to use parameters. And the parameters in our strings are numbers that are enclosed by curly braces, so I can have multiple parameters in my output line. Last time we just used one, so we just had that parameter number 0. This time we're going to have multiple, so I'm going to 3 and 4. And these commas are just what we want to print in between the parameters. They don't have anything to do with our code. Now, once I close that double quote, the comma does matter. Now that comma that comes after my double quote is going to start the list of data items that I want to use to replace those parameters. So I want to use my int, my string, B1, B2, B3, and B4. Now I do have an error on my int variable. What's it say? Yeah, it says it's unassigned. So it's here, it just doesn't have a value. So if I put equal 0 to give it an initial value, that should make that error go away. Now let's try and run our program. We should be all done here. We've set up an integer and a string and several Booleans and a system object Boolean. I'm going to print out all their values. I'm going to press Control F5. Bless you. And now I should see all of my different data variables. My integer, the 0, is displayed first. Then this is my character data, true, false, true, false. So we're just kind of exploring, working with some Booleans or working with some different variables and seeing what we can do with them. Now another thing I can do with our myInt variable, because it didn't like me leaving it just declared, it wanted it to have a value. Let's try the keyword default. What's it say? It says if we were using Visual Studio 2019, I would be okay. Right? So that's to come. So just be aware, that's an up and coming thing that we'll be able to do. 0, since it's numeric, it would still default to 0. So that'll be a new thing that we'll be able to do.
Do all data types have the default?
They do, so let's explore that. Now, before we explore it, I'd like to create a new project to put our exploration in. Find your Solution Explorer. And over here on your Solution Explorer, right now we have our solution and it has one project. The one project is our Chapter 3 new variables. Let's create another project so that we can have some additional testing going on in our solution without having to create a whole new solution. Now to do that, you want to click up here on your solution in Solution Explorer. And of course there are other ways, but if you come with me on this way, we'll all get there. And I want to right click on my solution and choose Add New Project. Now my new project screen is going to be the same is when we're creating a brand new solution. I want it to be a console app, and all I need down here is the name of my project. So let's make this one Chapter 3. New data types. Now this can be a real blow to some, so make sure you're watching and seeing what's going on. Now we have our old project and our new project both in this same solution. If you look, our old project is bold. That means if I push start, it's going to be the project that runs. I would like my new one to run instead. So I'm going to right click on that project and choose set as startup project. Okay. So now we have two projects in the same solution. We could keep adding more. So if we wanted to try some different testing things, we could. The only thing that gets confusing is, notice we have a program.cs in both of them. So we have to make sure that we're on the right one. And I know I'm on the right one right now because it's all empty. Right? So that's the one I want to start with, is our new one. So first, I'm going to fix my using statements. And then I'm going to put that XML header in there and say, explore variables using the new statement. Sometimes when we start coding, especially when we get a job and we're looking at all of the code that this company we now work for has, it can be pretty overwhelming because it can all look so strange because there's so many different ways of doing the same thing. So we like to explore those a little bit. This example, we're going to be using new to create variables. So I'm going to put a right line statement at the beginning. And again, I'm going to do that equal greater than that our textbook likes and say using new to create variables. Most of our data types that we've been using so far are native data types. They don't have to have any sort of object-oriented background to go along with them. But in C#, all of our native data types also have a behind-the-scenes object. And that's what we do if we use the new command. So Ken was asking if the integer or Boolean or whatever data type has a default value. When we go to the system object Boolean, and we create a new entity of that type, the default is to set it to false.
In this way, you're creating a new Boolean as an object, not as just a Boolean.
Not as just a Boolean, right. Now we can do the same thing with an integer. And if we create a new int, again, we are setting it to 0. That's our default value. And if we create a double, we're setting the default value of 0. Now, all of these native data types like integer and double and things like that, we don't usually see this kind of code very often. Where we normally see it is with more advanced data types that are actually objects, like our date time data type. I can create a variable dt and say it's a new date time. The default for date time will be 1101 at 12 a.m. Now I'm going to go ahead and write all of these variables out. And we're going to do all parameters. So 0, 1, 2, 3. And then what we want to replace those parameters with is B, I, D, and DT. Now, when you look at these variable names, they're not very good, right? Because they're so short. But you can see how they're kind of conductive to programming, right? We can get a lot more code there a lot quicker. So you can see why we want to keep our variable names short, just not too short. That might be a little too short if we were working with a really long program, but with our short program, it's okay. So just kind of practicing coding more than anything else and giving us a chance to see some different ways to do variable declarations. You should be able to run this one, Control F5, and see all of your object values. Everybody working okay? Now in your textbook, they talk about this data class hierarchy where we can get native data out very quickly, or we can use object type information to give us additional features and characteristics about our data. Let's check into that a little bit. Right after this write line, I'd like to do another write line. And this time I'm going to use a property of the integer. So I'm going to print out, here's the max of an int. And I'm going to use a parameter. And I want to replace that parameter with int.maxValue. Because we used an integer object here, we have access to the max value property of the integer object. So we can find out what the maximum value is of an integer variable. In the same way, we could find out what the minimum value is using the int.minValue property. I could do the same thing for doubles. I'm going to copy these 2 lines of code. And I'm going to make it be, say, the max of double. And then the minimum of double. One of the people that showed you their code today earlier used the string.length method to find out how long a string was. That's another thing that's available working with that string object. We don't have that length property available for working with integers or doubles because length isn't really a thing for numbers like that. All right, does it work? Get some numbers out. So now if I ever want to know what the smallest number I can get out of an integer is, I can use that property to find out.
run on the keyboard again?
Do what?
How do you run that program on the keyboard?
Control F5.
Okay.
Control F5. It's one of those when I look at it, I can't get it. Is it working?
I have a random here. Could you have it print out like X number past the decimal point of pi? Like I want to see like 20 numbers past the decimal.
You'd have to code it. You'd have to write that program to do it. Mhm.
And it would
But yeah,
only
you
go
could.
out to a certain number because pi is infinite. There's no way the computer I
You
guess
mean
would have
you
to-
can't have it stop like 5 after or 10 after? Like, you
Like,
can't pick a
The
random.
computer, if it was the computer, it'd have to only be up to a certain point.
Well, there's an equation to get pi, so you can fill
Yeah.
out the equation to get pi.
Yeah,
and
Mhm.
set
so
it
you could have it go out
That
to a
would-
certain.
that would give you like probably the maximum value of that, right?
Yeah, you'd have to.
That's,
Whatever customer is.
But I like to.
You'd have to set it to
a double.
decimal or the 64-bit. I think is it double that was
High,
64-bit?
value's
Yeah.
not actually really high, it's a lot.
Might be really high. Okay, in chapter 3,
So I think
that's a good experiment to try. In chapter 3, a lot of the stuff that's there is kind of things that you might want to refer to throughout the semester. So don't forget about that. Don't forget chapter 3 has all this information about formatting output and how all of the different data types are declared and everything, because it'll be really, really helpful to you. The next little section talks about working with char data types, and then they have some things about string data types and some of the string methods that are very, very helpful. So those will be things that'll be coming back on us all semester long. One thing about strings, when we look at, I'm going to click back on my other program.cs file. When we look at a string here, this my string I set to this data. This is my character data. Now if I created another statement that said new data and changed my string, there's an interesting thing that happens with strings when we're working with C#. First of all, this first string is loaded into into memory. And in memory, it has a specific address, right? Like memory address 1F7. And my string points to that address. So when I access my string, I get the result. This is my character data. Now, when I change that and I say my string now equals new data is now out there in memory. It has an address, and my variable now points to that address. This old string is still out there. It's still out there in memory. So it stays in memory basically until my program is done executing. So that's no big deal to us, right? Because I've just got this little character data out there in memory. But think about it. What if you were running a program that was processing employee data and you were going to read 20 million employee names? Does that matter now? It does. So the fact that strings are immutable is important. And it's more important when we get to dealing with more and more data. But later in this chapter, they show us a facility called String Builder. And if we use String Builder, we can actually create strings that just live while we need them, that don't stay in memory forever. So that is something that's really an important thing. And as we get to assignments where we're working more with strings, we'll revisit that and talk about it a little bit more. I'm going to save this one and I'm going to close it. And then I'm going to, well, before I close it, I'm going to open my folder in File Explorer so that I don't have to go searching for it. Because I'd like to take this project and zip it. And then I'm going to post it to our Discord channel.
Oh,
You're welcome. And hopefully that'll be enough reason for everybody to want to get on the Discord channel if you're not already on it, right? Okay, so let's see if it's actually gone. Has it made it through? Can you see it?
It's made it
It made it through. Awesome. Thanks. I get blocked so much.
there.
Okay, so we've got that. We're all set. We've done a lot of different practicing. We still haven't done any reading other than in REPL. So as you notice, you're going to have to pull pieces from different places. So I wanted you to have those notes. So find your notes and let's get your people updating them, because I'd like to talk about working with methods and subprograms. We're going to look at working with methods and subprograms.